My boss replaced me hours before the biggest deal of my life. But I got an offer no one saw coming. And then, if we missed this chance, the whole contract would slip through our fingers like water. That's what Harper whispered beside me, not even lifting her eyes from the laptop screen. I didn't respond. Instead, I circled a mistranslated phrase on slide 16 and drew a heavy line under a data point that was already 3 months out of date. My hand barely felt attached anymore. I had been holding that red pen for what felt like days, maybe longer, running through every slide, as if the numbers might change if I just looked hard enough. 6 hours. That's all we had left before the pitch began, and the conference room already smelled like a war zone. The air was thick with burnt coffee, dried-out expo markers, and the cold metallic edge of corporate panic. Stress had soaked into the carpet, crawled up the walls, and now clung to my skin like static. I hadn't slept in 4 days, unless you count those twitchy 10-minute intervals on the couch next to the printer. I'd been living inside this deck. Not just translating words, but translating intent, respect, tone. Every frame had been combed for meaning, every sentence stripped of fluff until it said exactly what it needed to. No more, no less. Because this wasn't just a presentation. This was Teijin Group, the second largest industrial consortium in Southeast Asia, headquartered in Busan, with operations across half the Pacific. If we landed this deal, our firm would crack open an entire region of contracts, expansions, partnerships, maybe even carve a permanent seat at the table for Western consultancy in the East. And me? I'd been living and breathing this pitch for nearly 11 months, sometimes waking up with slide structures in my head, sometimes forgetting what day it was. I didn't just build this proposal, I internalized it. Back when I worked in Busan, I used to translate client proposals in those cramped little glass offices where the walls were more for appearance than privacy. I learned the hard way what counted in Korean business culture. No shortcuts, no arrogance, no noise. You bowed a little deeper, waited a little longer, spoke only when the room allowed it. And if you were smart, you shut up more often than not. Maybe that's why I noticed it the second Ross walked in. No knock, no greeting. Just that sloppy, smug confidence that some men wear like a badge, like the smirk is supposed to convince you they've already won. I didn't even look up right away. I could feel him moving closer behind me. Standing way too close to my chair like this was supposed to be a casual conversation. "Nina," he said, tone casual but performative. "Can we talk for a second?" I knew before he opened his mouth. My whole body went quiet, like it was bracing for an impact I couldn't dodge. I stood up, grabbed the black folder I hadn't let leave my side in over a week, and followed him into the smaller glass box across the hall. It was technically another conference room, but it looked more like a medical display. Glass walls, white boards, no chairs. Nothing soft. Just optics. He didn't sit. Of course not. Instead, he turned halfway toward me like this was all spontaneous, like I hadn't just spent a year building something he was about to take apart. "We've been reviewing things," he said with that practiced breath managers use when they're pretending this was a team decision. "Leadership's decided we're going in a different direction for the pitch." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. He looked a little too relieved that I wasn't pushing back. "We've brought in Meline," he went on. "She's got more of that big room energy, you know? Executive polish, great delivery. She'll handle the actual presentation." I looked at him, not blinking, and asked the only question I could say out loud without losing it completely. "When?" "This afternoon," he replied, like he was reading me a weather report. "You've been instrumental in prepping everything. Seriously, can't thank you enough, but your role's evolving." "Evolving," I repeated, flat as the glass wall beside me. "To more internal strategy," he continued. "Frameworks, support functions, that kind of thing." It was almost impressive how cleanly he packaged the word demotion into a smile. He shrugged like this wasn't personal. Like he didn't just rip months of my work out of my hands and hand it to someone who'd never seen the inside of a Seoul boardroom. "We really appreciate everything you've done." That's when I smiled, just enough to make him hesitate. Then I walked out without a word. Meline passed me on the way in, perfectly ironed, lips glossy, posture firm. She gave me that soft, practiced smile some women learn early, the kind you offer when you want to say "I know this sucks," but I took the job anyway. It didn't bother me. I wasn't angry. I'd already read the email 2 days ago from Teijin's chief strategy officer. "We are grateful for your clarity and cultural fluency. If you ever consider working directly with us, please reach out." At the time, I didn't respond. It felt dangerous, uncertain, like flirting with the edge of a cliff. But now I knew exactly what I had to do. 6 hours later, The boardroom was packed to the walls with tension and cologne. Ross stood at the head of the long table, clutching a remote like it was a scepter, trying to look like the man in charge even though the lines around his mouth betrayed the truth. Meline sat closest to the screen, flipping through the presentation like she had written it in a burst of divine inspiration. Her voice, polished and practiced, floated above the murmurs, touching on market entry projections and regional partnership leverage. The executives from Teijin Group didn't interrupt, but they didn't lean in either. They were composed, careful, listening with the kind of silence that could cut through a cement wall. I'd seen that look before, in Busan, in Seoul, even in Daegu, when a room of powerful men pretends to nod while quietly deciding whether you're worth their time. Ross couldn't see it. Meline definitely couldn't. But I could, and I knew we were minutes from losing everything. So I opened the door. The sound of it cut through Medeline's sentence like a razor through silk. Heads turned. The temperature dropped. I wasn't in business casual anymore. I wore deep navy, tailored, sharp, minimalist. No jewelry, no accessories, just quiet strength in fabric and form. I walked in like I belonged there because I did. No apology, no hesitation, just a folder in my hand and a reason to use it. One of the Teijin executives, tall, late 50s, calm eyes, whispered something in Korean to the man seated beside him. Without pausing, I responded clearly, fluently, not loudly but with total ease. My consulting fee is now 15%. I work for you. Let's begin. The air cracked. The tension didn't just break, it collapsed. That executive smiled. Ross didn't move. His hands hovered near the remote like it might protect him. Meline looked up at me with that blank, terrified expression you only see when the floor disappears beneath someone who thought it was solid. She wasn't angry yet. She was still trying to process how a person she had been told was just support had somehow rewritten the entire room's energy in one sentence. I didn't look at them again. Instead, I walked to the seat across from Teijin's lead negotiator, nodded respectfully, and sat down as if I'd never left it. No one said a word. No one had to. The silence was loud enough. And then, Mr. J, Teijin's director of international strategy, leaned back slowly in his seat, his expression unchanged except for the flicker behind his eyes. He understood what Ross never could. This wasn't about language. This was about fluency in tone, gesture, pace, presence. I wasn't reciting translations. I was navigating an invisible map they all knew by heart. Ross cleared his throat, tried to step forward, but he didn't know what to do with his arms. His voice came out louder than necessary. Well, he said, aiming for casual, landing on shaky. Looks like we've had a bit of a miscommunication. I didn't let him finish. Still seated, calm, without raising my voice, I turned to Mr. J and spoke directly in Korean. Please forgive the confusion. The team structure changed recently, but I'm still responsible for the integration strategy. One of Teijin's associates translated for the rest, speaking softly and efficiently. I could hear the response before I saw it. The murmurs, the nods, the tiny shift in posture. Not approval yet, but alignment. Possibility. A door creaking open. Ross froze. Meline opened her mouth, closed it again. Her fingers twitched as she reached for a page that wasn't hers to begin with. I gave them both a single glance, nothing more, and turned back to the people who actually mattered. For the next 45 minutes, I gave the presentation I wasn't supposed to deliver. Slide by slide, in Korean and English, I walked the team through our projections, outlined our compliance roadmap, detailed the localized regulatory thresholds. I didn't dramatize. I didn't sell. I explained. I clarified. I listened. And when questions came about infrastructure limitations, vendor vetting, or regional sensitivities, I answered them without hesitation, directly and fluently. Not because I wanted to perform, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I respected the room enough not to treat it like a performance. Somewhere around slide 11, something shifted. I watched it happen. The faces across the table changed, not radically, but subtly, the way light shifts through morning fog. They stopped listening like a client being pitched and started reacting like a partner being heard. That's the part people miss. The goal isn't to dominate the room. The goal is to dissolve the wall between sides until you're on the same one. When the last slide faded, I stood slowly, thanked them again in Korean, bowed just slightly deeper than protocol, and walked out first. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't wait to see Ross's reaction or whether Meline was still pretending she knew what slide 12 was even about. I walked through the glass doors, across the lobby, and out into the chilled afternoon wind like someone who had already let go of everything they were never supposed to beg for. I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't check in with Harper. I didn't stop at the break room, didn't send a summary email, didn't even shut down my computer. I walked 3 blocks down to the curb where a car was already waiting, exactly as I had arranged 30 minutes before the meeting started. The driver opened the door, didn't ask where we were headed. He already knew. The Miran Hotel, Suite 2301. Tajin's temporary headquarters during the final week of negotiations. Mr. J was already there when I arrived. He stood as I entered, offered tea, didn't waste time with small talk. "We'd like to work with you directly," he said. Not, "We're interested," or "We're exploring." Just a clean statement, final and undeniable. I let the silence hang for a few seconds longer than most people are comfortable with, then nodded once. "Would it be structured through your U.S. branch?" I asked carefully. He shook his head. "No. We'd prefer to engage you as an independent consultant through a neutral third party. Less political pressure. More clarity." I already knew the answer. I had already filed the paperwork. I'd bought the domain name 3 nights ago after rereading that original email from Tajin's office. "Lyra Consulting," I said. "Singapore-based. No website. No noise." He smiled faintly. "We don't need flash," he said. "We need fluency." Afterward, I left the hotel and walked through downtown, past the glass towers with their shiny logos and the startup banners sagging against lampposts. The world moved around me like it always had, loud and distracted, full of people mistaking noise for influence. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt alert, like I'd crossed a border no one saw coming. And I knew what came next. Ross would find out. He'd call. He'd write. He'd try to control the narrative, spin it into a graceful transition, a pivot in leadership. He'd say things like mutual decision and internal restructuring. But he'd never admit the truth. He'd never admit that he had just fired the only person who could have closed the biggest deal of his career. By the time I stepped into my apartment that night, the sky had turned navy and quiet, the city blinking softly in the distance like it was too tired to keep shouting. I dropped my bag near the door, kicked off my heels, and sat on the floor without turning on the lights. My phone was buzzing again, but I didn't reach for it. I already knew who it was. Ross wasn't the type to wait. He was probably leaving upbeat voicemails with fake warmth and phrases like, "Let's reset expectations," hoping to pull me back into a script he could still control. I poured a glass of water and checked my email instead. 3 new messages waited at the top, all marked urgent. The first was from Tajin's legal counsel, confirming their intention to move forward with Lyra as the sole advisor. The second came from a logistics company I hadn't heard from in over a year, a quiet message asking if I was taking on outside work. The third, of course, was from Ross. Subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't open it. I didn't have to. Instead, I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Lyra Docs and adjusted the draft contract I'd been polishing for the past 4 days. It was lean, clear, precise. I changed the fee structure to 15% plus success bonus and added one final clause at the bottom. All communications with the client would now route exclusively through Lyra Consulting. No intermediaries. No overlap. No detours. Then I hit send. That night, I slept for the first time in 4 days. Not because I was relaxed, but because I was finished. By morning, Ross had already left 4 voicemails. The first one had that overly bright tone he reserved for manipulation disguised as positivity. "Hey Nina, crazy day yesterday, huh? Let's connect and figure out next steps. We're all still aligned." The second one sounded more urgent. "Just looping back, getting some confusing signals from Tajin. Looks like they're trying to go around formal channels. Let's hop on a call, maybe noon." The third voicemail was when the panic started to creep in. His voice cracked under the effort to sound in control. "Legal just showed me a draft contract from Tajin. Something with a firm named Lyra. Is that your firm? Can you call me?" The fourth was short, sharp, and cold. "Call me now." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I sat on the rooftop terrace of a cafe in Singapore, watching the morning light move across the skyline while I drafted the onboarding documents for Tajin. I outlined deliverables, set up a phased strategy calendar, adjusted the payment structure into 3 milestone triggers, and assigned project codes for internal tracking. By 9 a.m., they had countersigned. Lyra Consulting had its first official client. 2 hours later, the cracks at Commer Associates started to show. Harper sent me a message from her personal number. It was short and hesitant. "Hey, just wanted to say I saw what happened. You didn't deserve that. Madeline's spiraling. Ross is in the war room. No one knows what's going on. I didn't reply, but I saved the message. At 11:17 a.m., another one came through, this time from Mr. Lin, a former contact from the Singapore expansion project 2 years earlier. It arrived via WeChat. Heard you may be working independently. Can we schedule a conversation? By noon, I had 3 exploratory calls booked. One in Seoul, one in Tokyo, and one in Jakarta. I wasn't hunting them. They were coming to me. Later that afternoon, I got the email I had been expecting from Commerce legal team. Subject line: confidential, immediate action required. Attached was a multi-page PDF labeled non-compete violation notice. The letter claimed that by engaging with a former client, I had breached my employment contract. They used words like intellectual property, proprietary knowledge, and my favorite, company loyalty. I didn't finish reading it. Instead, I forwarded the email to my attorney in Jakarta and titled the forward, "The clowns are juggling." Within an hour, she replied with a single sentence that made me smile into my coffee. They never finalized your exit paperwork. No NDA, no non-compete. We have receipts. 6 weeks before Ross pushed me aside, I had asked for a formal title clarification after he restructured my role. I'd sent an email to HR, followed up 3 times, all documented, all time-stamped. The final thread was a Slack message from Ross himself that read, "Let's not waste legal's time on Nina's paperwork. Just cut her access. It'll be faster." He called it efficiency. I called it evidence. By 3 p.m., Commerce stock had dipped just under 2%. A blip, but not an invisible one. Tajin's name disappeared from their internal project calendar. 2 scheduled calls were quietly removed with no explanation. Meline kept sending follow-up emails with polite urgency. I imagined her watching as the read receipts sat unread and then vanished completely. That night, my phone rang again. It was Gabriel, one of Commerce's earliest investors. He was older, thoughtful, and never wasted words. "I've been hearing your name in places Ross can't reach," he said without preamble. I didn't respond. He continued without needing one. "There's an ethics committee meeting next Thursday. Some of us would like to understand what actually happened in that boardroom." I paused, let the silence stretch. Then I said, "If the purpose is truth, I'll be there." He didn't thank me. He didn't need to. We understood each other. After we hung up, I checked my inbox one last time. There was a new message from an AI firm in Tokyo I'd met 2 years ago. At the time, they didn't even know my name, just that I was the woman who built the decks from behind the scenes. The subject line read, "We heard about Lyra. Let's talk." I began drafting a proposal, mapping out an approach that could take them from theory to execution in under 90 days. But halfway through writing it, I stopped, not because I was tired, but because I realized something I hadn't let myself acknowledge until then. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about breathing. After years of trying to squeeze myself into rooms where I had to prove I deserved to sit down, where I had to speak twice as clearly to be heard once, I wasn't looking for validation. They gave me an exit door they assumed I'd never walk through. And now I was building, not outside the system, but above it, client by client, clause by clause, without apology and without noise. It started as a whisper, the kind of thing that floats between boardrooms and elevator doors. Then someone posted an article, a sharp, surgical takedown in a business journal that didn't usually traffic in scandal. The headline read, "Collapse at Commerce, How One Consultant Quietly Redrew the Map." My name was in the 3rd paragraph, not loud, not sensational, just placed carefully between facts and timelines like a blade tucked beneath silk. By noon, it was everywhere. An old photo of me leaving the building, clean lines, composed face, folder in hand, was circulating on LinkedIn, posted by someone I'd never even met. Their caption read, "She didn't torch the building. She removed the foundation and walked out." I didn't like it. I didn't comment. But I saved the screenshot, not for vanity, but for memory. Something about the way people were reframing the story now, no longer about what was taken, but what had been built. Commerce spiraled. Ross tried to call it a transition. Meline tried to play the misunderstood victim. But clients were no longer answering their emails, and new leads didn't make it past the first call. My inbox, however, was steady, quiet, full of short messages that began with, "Are you available for advisory?" or "Can we schedule something discreet?" I kept everything lean. No website, no office, just one encrypted portal and a single-line homepage that read, "Lyra Consulting, Fluent Strategy, Quiet Strength." Every email came through private servers. Every invoice routed through encrypted channels. I had no assistants on payroll, Only contractors working remotely from co-working spaces in Jakarta, Osaka, and Taipei. My legal team stayed 2 steps ahead of anything Ross might throw at me. They tried to draft a retroactive non-compete. They tried to define my work as sabotage. They even considered leaking a narrative to the press that painted me as a rogue former contractor acting without clearance. It was predictable, sloppy, and easily disproven. My attorney responded with a short statement and 5 attachments. Screenshots, Slack threads, time-stamped emails showing how I'd requested legal clarity on my title months before my departure. Then came the final gem, Ross's own message 2 days before the Teijin pitch. Don't loop legal. Let's just handle Nina's exit informally. No need for drama. That one would sing in Discovery. By the end of the week, for more clients had dropped off Commerce pipeline without explanation. Internally, Ross held back-to-back meetings with legal and HR. Then came the emergency shareholder call. I wasn't there, of course, but Gabriel was. He flew in from Vancouver just to sit in the front row with a hard copy of the exposé folded neatly in his lap. Ross opened the meeting with empty words, trying to regain control. There's been a lot of speculation, he said, but we remain committed to excellence. Someone in the back interrupted. You mean Nina Tran? The room didn't pause. It turned. Gabriel stood, walked up, and handed a folder to General Counsel. Inside were all the internal memos, the missing NDA forms, the approvals that never happened, and a summary of who authorized my termination without any process or protection. Then he said the sentence that ended the meeting before it ever really began. You fired the architect of your Asia strategy without paperwork, protection, or process, and now you're blaming her for surviving it. No one defended Ross. They couldn't, because by then, everyone understood that the company hadn't just lost an employee. They'd lost their leverage. That night, I sat alone on a balcony overlooking the marina, city lights flickering below like the whole skyline was breathing with me. I had no title, no badge, no schedule. But I had something better: clients, leverage, and trust. My phone buzzed once. It was a message from my assistant in Jakarta. Teijin finalized the new agreement. Japan Telecom followed. The Singapore contract just came in. Total projected value, 61 million over 3 years. I stared at the screen, then typed a single line. Begin onboarding. Quiet rollout only. No announcements. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The next morning, Commer issued a statement. A generic sentence buried in a wall of PR dust. We thank Nina Tran for her contributions and wish her well in her future endeavors. No apology. No correction. No admission of what really happened. And that was fine, because I wasn't waiting for them to validate a story they had already lost control of. 3 days later, I flew to Tokyo for a private meeting with one of Teijin's regional partners. We met in a quiet room on the 27th floor of a glass tower. No slides, no coffee carts, just white tea, a clean table, and a contract already translated. He greeted me with a small bow and said, in flawless Korean, "You were always the reason we stayed with Commer. We just didn't realize how replaceable they were until you left." I bowed in return and slid the contract across the table, redlined and ready. After the meeting, I wandered through a quiet market alley tucked behind the skyscrapers, bought a warm rice cake from a vendor who didn't know who I was, and sat beneath a cherry blossom tree that had bloomed a month too early. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel sharp or smug or vengeful. I felt true. For years, I had contorted myself into shapes that made other people feel comfortable. I'd spoken in tones that made men like Ross feel safe. I'd let my silence be mistaken for agreement. Not anymore. Now, I was building the table myself, deciding who sat, who spoke, who stayed. Client by client, clause by clause. No campaign, no headlines, just results. Because when you learn the language no one else bothers to speak, when you become the bridge instead of waiting for one, they can't fire you. They can only watch you walk away and realize, far too late, that you're not coming back. It should have ended there, quietly and cleanly, with contracts signed and silence restored. That was the future I imagined. No noise, no drama, just forward motion powered by precision and intent. But the world doesn't always end things when they're supposed to. Sometimes, it circles back around with one last test, one final twist to see what you've really learned. It started with an email from Teijin's procurement director, short and careful. They'd received an offer from a potential investor interested in acquiring advisory control over all international strategy arms, including mine. I read the name once and had to blink. Cashin, a real estate magnate turned venture disruptor, infamous across Jakarta for aggressive takeovers and whisper-level politics. He wasn't just rich. He was strategic, surgical, and ruthless. We'd crossed paths once during a summit, years back, and I remembered his eyes more than his voice. Calculated, unreadable, like he saw people in decimal points. At first, I ignored it. Then Gabriel called. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ease into it. He just said, Cashin isn't looking to buy Lyra out. He wants to replicate it. 5 shells across Asia, all under his umbrella, with you leading from the shadows. It was too absurd to process at first. The man who had watched me dismantle Commer from the outside now wanted to bottle it and sell it back in pieces. And you? I asked. What's your role in this? Gabriel paused, then said what I already suspected. He brought me in to structure the deal. But I warned him, if you read the fine print, it's over. So I read the fine print. Clause 5, tucked halfway down the second page, buried in legalese and favorable language, was the catch. If I accepted, Lyra would transfer 20% ownership to Cashin's holding company within 2 fiscal years. Automatic, irrevocable, triggered by clause fulfillment disguised as performance bonus language. It wasn't a partnership. It was a setup. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, watching the lights flicker across the Taipei skyline. For a moment, I thought about it, not because I was tempted by the money, but because I wanted to know how far I'd come. The version of me from 3 years ago would have spent a week analyzing risk, calculating trade-offs, building models in her head to justify the discomfort. But this version didn't hesitate. I didn't reply. I didn't counter. I didn't ask for clarification. Instead, I boarded a flight to Tokyo 2 days later, not for a client meeting, but to sit in on a closed strategy session between Teijin and their Japanese telecom partners. It wasn't my place to speak, but I was invited to observe. The room was quiet, structured, deliberate. No one performed. Everyone contributed. And when I stepped outside afterward, one of Teijin's senior advisors followed me into the hallway. He offered us the same deal, she said calmly. But his version didn't include you. I nodded once. And we declined. He doesn't speak the language. That night, back at the hotel, Gabriel called again. I let it ring 4 times before answering. He knows you saw the clause, he said, no preamble. Good, I replied. Then there's nothing to discuss. But there was. Because the next morning, I woke up to messages from clients, confused, cautious, asking why Cashin had mentioned Lyra in back-channel conversations as future strategic property. He was leaking proximity, creating the illusion of control before any deal had even been acknowledged. It wasn't desperation. It was marketing. He was placing bets on the idea that I could be folded quietly into his empire, then turned into leverage. So I made a different kind of move. I scheduled one meeting. Just one. In person. No assistants. No formalities. The location? A neutral boardroom in Jakarta, high above the chaos. All glass and silence. Cashin arrived 5 minutes early. I arrived 1 minute late. He stood, shook my hand, and smiled like this was just a formality. I admire what you've built, he said. Truly. And I think we both know it's bigger than a single firm. I didn't sit. I didn't offer a handshake in return. You don't get to put your name on something you never carried, I said. He didn't blink. He simply said, everyone carries something. Some of us just know how to scale it. That's when I dropped the folder onto the table. Inside was a revised draft. No ownership. No equity transfer. No shell firms. Just one clause. Lyra remains independent, non-acquirable, and sovereign across all regions. Advisory only. No entanglements. He skimmed it, laughed once under his breath, and said, this isn't a partnership. It's a perimeter. Exactly, I said. I don't need investors. I need air. He stared at me for a long moment, then closed the folder and said, you'll regret this. I leaned in slightly, not to intimidate, but to make sure he heard me. I already regret ever believing men like you were necessary. I walked out without waiting for a response. By the time I returned to Singapore, he'd already sent a withdrawal notice to Teijin, claiming strategic misalignment. 3 more clients followed up privately with messages that all sounded the same. Thank you for not folding. Let's talk expansion. And just when I thought the chapter had closed for good, the unexpected arrived. Meline. She showed up in Seoul during a summit, seated on a panel about international strategy, dressed in the kind of outfit meant to distract from credibility. She smiled through questions, cited vague metrics, and dropped one sentence that echoed across the floor. I believe the future lies in partnerships between agile firms and strategic capital. Everyone knew who she meant. Afterward, She found me near the elevator and said, "No hard feelings, right?" I looked at her, really looked, and said, "You never had a seat at the table. You had a ticket. It just expired." She blinked, smiled again, but this time, the edges didn't hold. Later that week, one of Cashin's advisors tried to meet with her. She posted a celebratory photo online. Then it happened. For weeks later, a leaked internal audit revealed that her firm had entered negotiations using falsified performance metrics pulled directly from the Commer pitch archives. Within days, her panel invites vanished. Partnerships dissolved. No one said her name after that. And just like that, the last thread tying me to that past burned out without smoke or sound. I didn't toast. I didn't post. I just opened my calendar and scheduled a one-way flight to Santiago. No meetings, no clients, no agenda. Just wind and sky and time. On the morning of my departure, I received a handwritten note from Tajin's global head of operations. It read, "You weren't just a translator. You were the signal we were waiting for." And in the corner, beneath his signature, was a phrase written in Korean. "Better bridges last longer than walls." I folded it carefully, placed it in my passport sleeve, and walked toward my gate. Not to escape, not to disappear, but because I could. Because this time, there was no door behind me. Only sky.